I wrote in my journal, knees a little sore, shoulders sore, but mostly I'm feeling glad to be out here instead of just thinking about doing it. And I feel like that's such a good snapshot of a lot of things in life, but especially about backpacking a new or unfamiliar route or territory. Hi, I'm Carrie.
And I'm Molly.
And you're listening to the
Two Sisters on Adventures podcast.
As always, if you want to see any pictures or videos about what we talk about today, you can follow us on Facebook or Instagram at Two Sisters on Adventures. And if you'd like to leave a rating or review, you can do that on the platform of your choice, wherever you listen to podcasts. So today we're going to talk about the winds, and this will be the first day that we talk about where we're actually in the winds versus about all of our weird planning and little pivoting. But we felt like that was very important to the story, so I hope you guys didn't mind hearing all of our little problem-solving criteria. But on the first day that we were going to be in the winds, we woke up in our little Holiday Inn in Landers, and I remembered I felt pretty good about our plan because we were on a pretty, what I like to call, bailable route. But I did wake up at like 4 a.m. with my heart just like racing, and I was like, okay, so I just kind of had to like remind myself like we've made a good choice and just kind of pray that we would be able to make good choices on trail. And then I fell back asleep, and then when we got back up at, I don't know, I feel like we didn't have to be there very early. I think we didn't leave our hotel till like 9 or something like that. Maybe that's not true.
Yeah, I feel like it was not like as extremely early as it could have been, but we did have to leave at like a decent time. So I don't know. It wasn't like the day had really gotten started too much when we packed up and hit the road and started to head to make our complete circle around the Green River Range before we really got to get the chance to get into it. And just thinking about how we'd been in Jackson Hole and then gone across to Du Bois and then over to Lander on the east side. And then we were going to go on the south side of the range and then catch a ride with a shuttle that we just booked the day before to get dropped off at Green River Lakes Trailhead. So we had probably made it about 80% of the way around the entire mountain range before we laid foot on trail in the winds, which is pretty remarkable.
We circumnavigated them, just not by foot. It was a combination of car and foot and other person's car situation. So we were driving towards the trailhead, and the trailhead that we were going to leave our car at and return to in 7 days, ideally, after walking, was Big Sandy Trailhead. This is actually a pretty popular trailhead for the winds. The winds are not really overrun in the way that a lot of trails in Washington and on the West Coast are. So I think that people are quite surprised when they come to Big Sandy and the trailhead is just completely packed. But it was a really cool drive coming into Big Sandy because you kind of got to see the winds begin to appear before you. And it was like, wow, I wonder if in a week we'll have more of a connection to these peaks that we're seeing. And then as we're just driving on the gravel, all of a sudden there's antelope everywhere. And it was just fun to watch them like run and jump and play and try to go in front of your car. Oh wait, that part wasn't fun. But it was just really cool to see. I don't know, we're from North Dakota, so it felt kind of exotic to see antelope before a hike.
We're used to seeing a bunch of white-tailed deer, so not the antelope. And the antelope were so fast. And we saw like several herds of them as we were driving towards Big Sandy Trailhead. And I almost took it for granted because then when we actually were driving to leave the winds, we didn't see any antelope. So it was fun, but also slightly nerve-wracking because they run so fast and always seem to be heading towards your vehicle, requiring keeping an eye out for them. But the nice forest roads. I mean, when I think of forest roads, and oftentimes in the West Coast, I think of pretty like heavily forested areas. But here it's nothing but probably some like BLM land where there's, some cattle that are being ranched and grazing, and the antelope are running around, and you just have this clear, pretty unobstructed view of of the winds as they kind of melt into the skyline. And then the rest of the trip, I really had the home on the range stuck in my head, thinking about the antelope roaming around. So that song was recurring in my mind pretty much daily as I traveled through the winds.
There also, I think we saw our first little glimpse of some cattle. There are some areas that are like open pasture out there. So it's kind of a funny mix where obviously cattle aren't urban, but it feels more urban than like an antelope, you know? So you're like kind of seeing this mix of like, you know, these very wild animals and then these animals that are a little bit more domesticated. And so it's kind of a funny mix. And I feel like that's kind of my impression of Wyoming is it's like a mix of just like very intense and wild wilderness, but then also these areas that are not wild, you know, at all, like the Forest Service roads. So we made it to Big Sandy Trailhead and there were so many cars there. What day was this? This was like a Sunday or a Monday?
I think it was a Sunday. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was a Sunday. And so we were kind of thinking, oh, shoot, you know, we're probably not going to get a good parking spot. And then there's no service. So you kind of run into that awkwardness of, is my driver already at the trailhead? Do I wait at the trailhead or do I park at the far away overflow parking lot and try to wave her down when she comes by? And so we decided we would just go up to the actual like trailhead and we would just use the bathroom, get our stuff kind of shifted around so we'd be ready when she came. And then if we had to find a different parking spot, we would. We made it to the trailhead. We were using the restroom. We were visiting with these meteorologists, which was pretty fun. And also, interesting sidebar, any meteorologists we meet with, we met with 2 this summer randomly, and both of them, what they had to say was they did not want to die from a lightning storm because they'd be so embarrassed to die of that because they're meteorologists and they should know better, to which I'm like, does being a meteorologist really mean that it's impossible to be killed by lightning? But I guess that's just like the most embarrassing thing apparently that can happen in that profession.
It's not it's not impossible. It's just the most embarrassing way to die as a meteorologist.
She was like, and of course I know about the lateral lightning strikes too. And I'm like, lateral lightning strikes. Look that up when you get service. But fortunately, while we were visiting with them, it was as though lightning struck us because...
In a good way.
Yeah, in a positive way, not in the humiliating way. Because there was a car that was parked almost right next to us, and the people who were, you know, from that car came back from their trip and left. So we were able to park in a really convenient spot, which it doesn't really matter, you know, you're going to be backpacking anyway, but when you're trying to meet with someone that you don't know what they look like, you also don't know really exactly what they're driving, and they don't know what you look like or what you're driving, it makes it easier if at least you can be in a central location.
Oh, and I mean, right, we were going to meet there and then like park elsewhere if needed, but there's just something that's so, it's not defeating per se, but when you're going to walk like, you know, 90 miles when you get back to the trailhead and you know you have another half mile, sometimes that last half mile is what really drags. So we were really excited to know like, okay, when we do end our hike, we're not going to have to walk very far to get in the car and jet out of here.
So our driver pulled up. We were able to pretty easily make contact with her, which was very nice, you know, and then there's always that kind of nerve-wracking moment of getting everything into the car and making sure of 2 things. Yeah. Number 1, that you bring everything that you need to bring. And number 2, that you don't actually accidentally bring something that you didn't need to bring. I'm always so afraid I'm going to wear my Birkenstocks into the shuttle and then have to carry my Birkenstocks and my camp shoes all the way, or forget my hiking shoes and only have Birkenstocks and sandals. But luckily, having a fear of that helps to prevent from that actually happening.
And then another fear would be number 3, making sure you have the keys to your car so that when you get back to the trailhead, you can actually leave, as we had experienced in the past when we almost forgot our keys. But fortunately, we're good on that.
And I'm circling back around and realizing the reason that I'm so worried about leaving my shoes is because one time you were supposed to put my boots in the car, and I saw you put 2 pairs of boots in the car. So I was like, that's so kind of her. And then we got to the trailhead 2 hours away, and I only had my Birkenstocks because you had
And this is for a day hike. Yeah. Be mindful, not a long through hike.
And you had brought 2 pairs of boots for yourself on purpose, no pairs of boots for me, and I had to just hike it in Birkenstocks.
And you did great.
It was okay.
But not ideal for 80 to 90 miles through the Wind River Range.
Not ideal at all.
So we made one last check of the Wrangler and made sure that we didn't have anything in there that we needed, and we got in the car with our driver and off we went. She was going to shuttle us to the Green River Lakes Trailhead, which is where we were going to begin the Allen-Dixon route through the winds. So we actually then kind of headed back out on the Forest Service Road, and then we got to a junction that we had come from, and we turned to go west towards Pinedale, thus further completing our circuit around the winds. And had some really good conversation with our driver. She was a pretty chill person and had been she'd grown up in Wyoming. I think she'd been over on the different side of Wyoming and then moved to Pinedale, and she really liked the culture of Pinedale. And we had conversation about just like what it's like to be a person kind of in a service industry, also into the arts in that area versus people who are in like Jackson Hole, where there's more of a scene for them, but the cost of living is so high. So that was kind of interesting. And I had just paid attention to the fact that, she was so calm that I feel like it just kind of calmed down my jitters. Cause I mean, it's like I knew that I could do what I was going to set out to do, but I feel like anytime you're in a new environment, and especially just like the, hour or two before you set out on a backpacking trip, I tend to get the jitters, but just having some pretty chill conversation with a very calm person was nice to just kind of calm me down and feel like, okay, I can do what I'm setting out to do. I feel confident in myself and my sister.
Yeah, I was going to say I felt the same way. It was just like she was so chill, and she had done a ton of outdoor recreation. I think some in the winds, some in other areas, but it just felt nice to know that there were like other local people who go into these mountains and they're fine and they enjoy it and it's beautiful, and she was happy for us. One little funny thing about this whole situation is we were having such good conversation that we actually missed the turn to our trailhead, and I don't know how much that added on to our drive, but it was kind of a little bit shocking when all of a sudden we're like, wait a second, I think we missed the turn. And so now here we were having to kind of backtrack, I don't know, at least half an hour. So it kind of added an hour onto a drive that was already pretty long. But honestly, it was totally fine. We pulled up to the trailhead around 1:15. She dropped us off, and we actually were ready to hit the trail about 1:30.
And really her parting message for us when, as she heard about how we're going to do this kind of like 8-day trip through the winds is just that she was just so excited for us to get to experience them. And like physically, I think she was like a little bit more limited as far as like how far she could go distance wise. And she was just saying like how beautiful some of the scenery was in the areas of the winds that she had been, and how much she wished she could do something like we were going to do, which is going through like the range from one into the other. So I feel like that also helped me to feel just like what a privilege and an honor it was for me to have the ability to attempt something like this.
So starting at Green River Lakes Trailhead, you kind of get some beautiful scenic vistas immediately. Like right off the bat, you are at this lake that is a beautiful glacial teal / greenish color. And that's the route that you get to just follow as you start. And I was surprised that there were a decent amount of cars at the trailhead and relatively a decent amount of people that we saw on trail. But honestly, it seemed that people were only going on the kind of short distance around the lake. So once we kind of made it past the lake, we really didn't see that many more people. But it was really cool because there's this rocky structure that's called Flat Top. And it's just like this huge, I don't know, what would you call that, Molly?
A monolith?
Sure, a monolith, a large rocky thing. And it reminded me of like Yosemite, right? Yosemite has its half dome, its El Capitan, all these very iconic rock structures. And then here there's this flat top, which I had seen on someone else's Instagram who was doing the CDT a couple weeks before or something like that. And I thought, wow, that is just like so unique and so cool. And so then to actually be there and for it to be the thing that we saw as we walked towards it for miles was really, really cool. So we decided not to have lunch that day because we weren't starting till 1:15. And the one tip that I would say is I always like to, when I leave a hotel, I'll just make myself an extra bagel. And then that way I was able to eat that in the car as we drove to the trailhead. So it wasn't really like we had missed lunch, but we also kind of hadn't had lunch. And we were able to just kind of keep trekking. We found a good rhythm right away. And we obviously wanted to make it about 12 miles before dark. So starting at, 1:15, 1:30 p.m. If you're doing only 2 miles an hour, that's 7:30. So you can't afford to take many breaks. But after we'd made it about 8 miles, I did start feeling just really, really tired. And I finally said, you know what? I kind of feel like I just need to sit down and I need to rest. And the geography of this trip was really neat, right? Because you start in this open kind of like lake area, and then you transition to more meadow, but it was kind of a dry meadow, so it wasn't like flowers or anything like that. And then we had started transitioning to forest, so it was a little bit rocky and forested, but not forest like the West Coast. It was forest like the winds.
And just some other notes, like as we were traveling along, we just had the most beautiful blue skies with these cute clouds, nothing like foreboding at all, but just these like really scenic clouds floating in the air. Our whole drive from the West Coast out to the winds, like the majority of our drive before we dropped down into Wyoming was so smoky. Like we drove through just dense smoke, into like Boise area and then continued in smoke. And so we were kind of questioning what the winds were going to be like, as far as just like, were we going to deal with a lot of haze and a lot of just like smoke in the air. And it was just like such a beautiful, clear day. I hardly could believe that there was so much other wildfire smoke in other areas, but the winds was very clear. And then we'll get to Carrie chatting about our rest break in a moment, but I don't know if you were going to mention, just you think of like Green River Lakes, like how like confusing is that for a name? Like, okay, so the lake is Green River Lakes.
And especially because like in Oregon, there's like Green Lakes, and I feel like I've been somewhere else where there was Green River. So I thought I was just confused when I was saying Green River Lakes.
But no, it's actually just a very descriptive and accurate term. So there's a river called the Green River, and I believe it comes from, I don't remember if I remember the glacier that river is fed by, but it's I feel like a glacier that you maybe do encounter on one of the high routes. So the river,
it might be the Knife Point Glacier, but I also might be wrong.
So the river is one of the most beautiful rivers I've ever seen. It's just this, like Carrie said, like the teal, like a milky green color. And it's one of those where you like stand close to it and you realize you have no idea how deep it is, because there is like, you can't see very deep into it because because of that color of the water.
I told Molly I really wanted to just like reach in and touch it because I bet it was so cold, and it was a little bit warm out that day, but I was like, I can't even get close to it because the banks were like these grassy, muddy, soft kind of things, and then I could tell it was running fast, and I had no idea how deep it was.
I like knelt down to try to touch it, and I realized I was gonna have to really lean to get to the water, and I was like, at that point I feel like I'm leaning out of my balance past the point of no return, and I do not want to end up in this river, so I guess we'll just have to touch it some other time. But anyway, so it's just pretty remarkable because that Green River that feeds Green River Lakes, which there are several lakes, it's just a supremely scenic area. And we did meet a few people who were hiking there just to acclimatize for like a hunting trip, I think. And so, wow, a person could just spend the day even just walking around in that area. And we were fortunate that our first day we only gained about 900 feet of elevation total over our 12.5 miles. So we once again can hum along at about a 3 mile an hour pace average, and just kind of knock out those miles. But indeed, like Carrie said, after 8 miles, sometimes you do need to rest a little bit, especially when it's your first day on trail and you're at about 8,000 to 9,000 feet of elevation already.
Mm-hmm. So after our break, we continued on, obviously, and I would say that it was a really cool area. There was like a big drop off kind of next to us, but it was also forested, and at the bottom was the river, and it just looked so beautiful and very playful. We met a couple other groups, and they all seemed to be in terribly bad moods, which I'm not really sure what was going on with them, but I did write in my journal that maybe people were just so deeply desiring solitude that they really were upset to see anyone else out there. I don't know. And in the coming days, we'd actually meet some very friendly, very chatty people, but these people just must have been carrying packs that were very heavy or something. But the thing that's funny is the more that you hike, the more you see things that remind you of places you've already been. And so I remember very just vividly, we were walking through this like rocky forested area, and I just felt like almost a deja vu as though we were in Washington. Except I will say, I think we were a little bit more heightened in terms of our awareness for like bears, because we were it was our first time backpacking in bear and grizzly country, and it was our first day. So I think as the days go on, you get a little less nervous. But it was like we're finally in the woods, and it's like, oh, what's behind that rock? What's behind that tree? But it was nothing, and we were able to just keep cruising, honestly, until I had looked on Far Out and kind of decided the distances that I thought we could go to have decent campsites, and there was just this area which I wrote in my journal. I said, today we went from Green River Lakes Trailhead to random bridge/meadow thing. And that's a pretty accurate, I would say, description of it. As we were walking along, kind of just keeping an eye out for where the camp, there's no designated campsites on this trip. So it was kind of like looking for an area where, you're not camping on super non-durable surfaces, and it's also flat enough or a little bit sheltered for if there happened to be rain through the night. And it's like, as you're keeping an eye out for it, first you're crossing this like little sludgy, gross looking creek, and you're like, oh, I hope that this isn't going to have to be where we get our water from.
It was.
Actually, no, there was a worse sludgy creek, but then there was a better sludgy creek that we crossed, and I was like, surely this isn't the bridge. But then as I walked a little farther, I looked and I saw there was like a perfect area to do a little bit of camping with some nice flat spots. And so we decided we'd just go ahead and call it quits for the night. We had actually originally wanted to go about maybe 2 more miles, but it was really trending towards evening. We'd already done quite well for our first day, and it was at elevation. So I think we kind of just were like, well, there's no reason to just like push and push and push when we found a perfectly good campsite where there's spots for us to camp.
And at this point, we were traveling on the CDT. And then in order to do our high route, the next day, we would travel a few more miles on the CDT. And this is when we would start to really gain some elevation in earnest. And then there would get to be a junction where we would begin to head off to what was called Knapsack Col to actually do kind of more of that off-trail high route versus staying along the CDT. So what Kiri mentioned is like we wanted to go 2 miles further because that would allow us to gain a little bit more elevation, and then we just know ourselves and that we're not good at just leaving camp early. So set us up for success to get to the col, which is an exposed area, before dropping down, just because we knew that there were chances of showers basically every day that we were going to be out there. So it made sense for us to stop early because we didn't need to be traveling in the dark on our first night in the winds. And we'd covered a lot of ground and we were feeling like we were ready to rest. But yeah, always the things that we have to consider as hikers.
So we found a good campsite, and flashback, when we were in Du Bois, we had gone and gotten some pizza at a little pizza place, and we had met a couple guys there who were actually doing the CDT. And I remember I'd asked them, oh, have you already gone through this, the winds, or are you about to go into them? And they said, oh, we're about to go into the winds. And I didn't visit with them very much, but the funny thing was, when we rolled up to this campsite, who was camping beside us but one of the guys that we had visited with in the pizza place. So it was a little bit of a funny reunion to, just kind of randomly roll up, and it's that same guy you saw from Du Bois. And so we visited for a couple minutes, and it seemed like he was having a good trip, but he was ready for a nice early through hiker bedtime. So we went ahead and made our campsite, got it all set up, and then we rehydrated our meal, which was one of the ones we'd made homemade. This trip was kind of fun because actually I think most of our meals were homemade on this trip, which is something we've kind of recently gotten more into. And I really honestly enjoy dehydrating the foods that we bring backpacking. I feel like they're just so flavorful and you know exactly what's in them.
Was this one of our first trips where we committed fully to just the half-liter Nalgene's and not bringing our other collapsible cups for hot beverages?
Yeah, it was. So we've always had the Sea to Summit X cup, which is, well, not always. We got that a couple years ago, though, which is a collapsible cup that we use for our electrolytes, we use for our coffee or hot chocolate, anything like that, we'd use those cups. But we had gotten some half-liter Nalgene's over the summer, and they're very cute and tiny looking. And I think we kind of discussed that we really like them and we kind of thought we might like to bring them because the issue with those cups is when you want to have your electrolytes, you have to like sit down, put it in there. If you want it mixed up, you got to stir it with an actual spoon. And then, you got to like rinse it out before you carry it again, because otherwise it's just going to get on all your stuff. But I was like, well, actually, this means we could have electrolytes where we like put them in and we can just kind of have them whenever we want as we're walking.
And remind me, did we bring 2 Smart Water liter bottles and the Nalgene?
I don't think so. So the reviews I'd read about this trip said that water is super plentiful in the winds, and you don't need more than a 1 liter Smart Water bottle, like at any point, even and at any point of the year. And so I was kind of going off of that information. But we also always have our Canuck bag, and so I always figure if we find ourselves in an area where it seems like it's super dry and we might need more water, we could just grab an extra 2 liters with a Canuck.
Yeah, so we actually were able to shave, which we're never able to really shave any weight or items, it seems. But this trip we did take away one of our Smart Water bottles, and then we took away our the X cup and then subbed in a 1/2 liter Nalgene. So then we would always have at least 1.5 liters of liquid. And then like Carrie said, if we needed to, we have 2 extra liters we could put into the Canuck. So we'd have like 2.5 per person, which is very suitable for longer distances as well.
One thing that was super cool about this campsite as we were looking over some pictures and videos from when we stayed there is it's basically a meadow with just granite mountain peaks all around you. And it was like you literally could spin and do a 360, and I mean, there's just mountain peaks everywhere. It reminded me a lot of the Tuolumne Valley that you travel through on the John Muir Trail, where it's kind of just like an open grassy area, but all around you are the towering granite mountains. And so that was a really just unique and cool place to be. And we saw there were some people there who did they have ice axes or did they just have rope? Yeah, they had like their helmets, ice axes, and some climbing rope. And I don't know exactly what objective they had actually completed, or if they were planning to do an objective tomorrow. But it's just like always fun to see everyone out in the wilderness out there to do their different things.
And this is one of the few times we had to deal with some pesky mosquitoes on the trip in the winds, and I'm pretty sure we had decided not to bring any bug spray as well, so we just had to use our resources, such as wearing our long sleeves and our pants and everything like that. And I'm sure that just the meadow area is like a nice place for mosquitoes to hang out, and people like to hang out there too, but you have to get along with the mosquitoes or kill them however you can. And so the Green River flowed right past where we camped, and so it was very scenic, just like so beautiful to look at. But like we've talked about in the past, any water that has that glacial flour or rock that's silt in it is something that we don't want to use in our filter because it will permanently stay there. So we did have to end up, we had enough water for what we needed because we'd filled everything up to the brim before we left that kind of mucky water source. And so we would have to decide the next day if we wanted to either we knew we didn't want to filter here, so we had to decide if we wanted to like backtrack to filter or what we wanted to do.
So we tucked ourselves into bed and we were excited for tomorrow. Tomorrow was going to be the day where we were hopefully going to start the Allen Dixon route by going over Knapsack Col, but there was also a pretty good chance of thunderstorms coming in the afternoon. So we knew we were going to have to set our alarms for an early morning. I wrote in my journal, knees a little sore, shoulders sore, but mostly I'm feeling glad to be out here instead of just thinking about doing it. And I feel like that's such a good snapshot of a lot of things in life, but especially about backpacking a new or unfamiliar route or territory. It's so much better when you're because beforehand you do have to plan ahead, you have to prepare, you have to think through all the scenarios so that you can be prepared in the moment. But when you're out there, it's like, okay, I know us. I know that we're just going to be able to make decisions and pivot, and just we're also getting to have the experience of being out there. And so it just is so much better when you're not having to sit there trying to think of every eventuality and what should I do, and when you're actually just able to be there and experience it. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Two Sisters on Adventures podcast. As always, if you want to see any photos or videos of things that we talked about today, like such as flat top, because I feel like our description of a monolith / rock structure is a terrible description of a really, really cool thing. You can see it there. Thank you so much for listening. We're going to have another episode for you guys next week. Bye.